All point of views expressed on Shop Talk 360 are solely the point of views of the individuals and do not represent any company, organization, or group. Shop Talk 360, the industry's dedicated platform for commercial design, construction, and facilities. With more than 25 years building for national retail brands, an award-winning and best-selling author, keynote speaker, industry coach, and event producer, here's our host of Shop Talk 360, Grace Daly.
Hey, Shop Talkers, welcome to our show. Very, very excited to have Brad Gaskins, principal with the McIntosh Group, joining us today. Hey, Brad, thank you for making time with us.
Thank you very much, Grace. I appreciate it.
Now, we met a few months ago at a conference, and since then we've been in touch, and we've had some real, very interesting dialogue about the whole ADA world. And you shared so much with me. I'm so excited to have you as our guest. Now, share with our audience the services McIntosh Group provides.
Okay. Well, McIntosh Group is a full-service architectural firm, first off. But we do have a specialty practice within our firm that does ADA services or accessibility services. But primarily our firm practices with rollout architecture, prototype management for large-scale programs, and we use a lot of technology in our practice to help transform our clients' programs and businesses. We found that technology throughout what we primarily do with the rollouts and the ADA services really helps them manage their businesses better and what they need to accomplish better.
Okay. So you do work nationwide?
Yes. We are licensed architects in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico.
Great. Now, what are some of the three trends or the latest requirements and developments you're finding in the ADA world, specifically in retail, restaurant, and hospitality?
Okay. The three things that we continue to see, it's just a matter that it's kind of continuing to increase, I guess. But lawsuits, they are continuing to increase year after year. More and more lawsuits are being filed. And I think one of the things that's driving that is that there's a lack of understanding that this is a civil rights law. The ADA is a civil rights law, not a building code. So compliance with the building code and getting a permit may not be good enough when it comes to ADA compliance. So that has continued to, again, drive lawsuits because that is the mechanism for enforcement of the ADA. The second trend that we see is that I think a lot of our clients are starting to understand that even though they're building new construction, it may not be in compliance with the ADA. And while that sounds kind of strange, that how could we do something that's new that's not in compliance, it's the fact that it is still very, very difficult to construct a building that's in compliance. The drawings may be correct, so if the architect gets it right, the contractor still has to get it right. And then you continue there, and you're talking about 1/16 of an inch as measurement that's compliance with the ADA. So again, it's very, very difficult, and we're starting to see more and more clients understand that and do post-construction, pre-takeover type of surveys to make sure that they're constructed correctly before they actually accept the construction. And then the third thing that we're seeing is that there's a bigger understanding that there's no such thing as grandfathering. There used to be this prevalent attitude that, well, my building was built before the ADA. Well, it doesn't matter. There's no such thing as grandfathering. There's a barrier removal obligation, so our clients are starting to see that, and they're starting to put into place programs that are allowing them to remove those barriers before they get hit with lawsuits.
Very interesting. Now, you brought up a very interesting point. Your second trend that you mentioned was that, and you stressed on, was that the ADA is a civil rights law. It's not necessarily a building department law per se.
That is correct.
Did I understand that correctly? Okay. So that's really interesting. So then I guess, so then there's variations sometimes in the way new facilities are being built that is not necessarily meeting the requirements of ADA?
Yes. When you prepare plans for your projects and you submit them to the building department, they're reviewed for code compliance, and they come out as stamped as approved. And they're feeling that, well, I got a building permit or I got a C of O. Isn't that good enough? And no, it's not, because the building department review for the building code, not for ADA compliance. So that's the first issue that you get there. And then if you look at that, you go a little step further beyond that, and you look at the fact that the ADA sometimes is more strict than the building codes. Then you might have met with the building code, but then not be in compliance with the ADA. Although that's becoming less and less prevalent as the building codes are starting to be upgraded. We're not seeing a lot of the building codes that aren't at least as strict as the ADA, but we still have some situations, such as the state of Massachusetts with their building code, that is not fully compliant with the ADA.
That's interesting. It kind of brings me back about 15 years ago when I was building for a vitamin retail chain. And I remember we did a very aggressive rollout program, probably 125 stores a year for three years consecutively. And I distinctly remember, this is again, Brad, 15 years ago, but this made me think of it, was that in the state of Texas, they seem to have, back then, 15 years ago, they seem to have very stringent requirements for ADA that were that were very specific and unlike the other states. So I remember the architect we had working with us did specific requirements for the state of Texas. But obviously that was 15 years ago, so I'm guessing now with ADA, it's regulated throughout the country in terms of states, or not really, because you mentioned Massachusetts.
It is both. Yes, it is both. The ADA is a civil rights law, so it is a federal law, therefore it trumps all state law. If it is more stringent, then it is what regulates the construction. And it's more than construction as well, because, again, it's a civil rights law. One of the very first lines of the ADA is sort of says, thou shalt not discriminate. If you can't discriminate, it doesn't matter what else you do, you can't discriminate. Whereas building codes are a very prescriptive method for getting buildings constructed in a certain way. And yes, there are states that have very strict building codes. And more states are now starting to adopt the ADA standards as their building code. 3 states in specifically that we'll talk about. California, they basically adopted the ADA as their building code. But as part of that, they've made over 250 changes to that document in the state of California. Florida has also adopted the ADA as their standard, standards for building code compliance. But Florida has only made about 25 changes to that document. And then you go to the state of Texas, and the state of Texas also adopted the ADA standards as their accessibility standards, as their building code, but they made almost no changes to their, it's 99.9% absolutely compliance with the ADA. So see, there's a mixture all across the country as to what different states are doing, and you also have to know what those states are doing as well as what the federal law requires.
Interesting. And then the third point you brought up also was grandfathering and how that will be no more.
Yes, and there never actually really was any such thing as grandfathering. It was just a giant misconception, and people are starting to realize that now. A building could have been built in 1920. It doesn't matter when it was built. It still has to be compliant with the ADA standards. It has to be brought into compliance. You have to remove barriers, and a barrier is basically defined as anything that's not in compliance with the ADA standards. So if you if you bring that building forward, if it's a readily achievable barrier removal process, meaning it's readily achievable to remove that barrier, then building owners and tenants should have been removing those barriers for the last 26 years almost. They haven't been because there was this notion that, well, I was built before the ADA, so I'm grandfathered in. But that's not correct.
Okay, interesting. And just to share a quick story with you, about 4 years ago, I had a foot surgery. And I was in a wheelchair, Brad, probably for, 4 months or so. And I lived in New York City. And I remember just having firsthand experience of what it feels like to be, in a wheelchair and needing to get around the city. And every little thing from whether the sidewalk, ramps to cross the street to going into, a New York City restaurant, everything was extremely challenging. And so I always thought, having been in the business somewhat of retail and restaurant, development, I always thought, well, it's New York City. So the spaces are tighter, the buildings are older, everything's tighter and smaller, so they're grandfathered. But I guess that's not the case.
No, they were not grandfathered. Now, there are probably lots of situations where it wasn't readily achievable to remove a barrier. And so in that case, you don't have to remove that barrier, but you have to make maybe alternative plans for how you're going to achieve accessibility to those buildings. And
very interesting.
And what those are is a case-by-case basis, but those ideas do have to be implemented, yes.
Okay, very interesting. So, and help me understand this process because, so present day now, let's just say pretend if you want to double check if you're ADA compliant, then who is actually approving that? That would be the ADA, not the building department.
Nobody has formal authority to approve that you're in compliance with the ADA. The only way to know that you're in compliance with the ADA is through lawsuits and winning a lawsuit. Now, our services, what we do is we do code compliance surveys. I say code compliance. Let me change that. We do ADA compliance surveys, and then we'll give a client either at the end a certification that to the best of our knowledge and belief that the building is in compliance with the ADA, or we give them a list of everything that we think is not in compliance with the ADA with a possible solution to how to bring it into compliance with the ADA. So, again, you don't know. There's nobody checking for ADA compliance. There's people checking for building code compliance, but they don't do necessarily a thorough check to make sure everything is in compliance like you would have to do for an ADA compliance and a site survey to make sure that your in construction is ADA compliant.
Wow. Okay, that's really interesting. So Brad, what's a hot project on your plate right now?
Well, we're doing a lot of proactive lawsuit avoidance work right now. We've got several clients who have hired us to review all of their facilities. As part of this process, again, that's where we go out. We'll look at their facility. We'll do a barrier report listing all the barriers, which allows them to then do what the law requires, which is to come up with a plan how they're going to remove these barriers over a 3 to 5, maybe even a 7-year plan if it's very extensive. This also helps them look at every barrier. So I've got this barrier, I have a step into my building, so that's a barrier. Now, how am I going to fix that? Do I have to put in a ramp? Do I have to put in an elevator? Well, I don't think you're going to have to put in an elevator, but for some reason, let's say you did, then the client can then make the determination whether it's readily achievable to do so. A ramp may very well be readily achievable, whereas an elevator would not be readily achievable for that client to do that. So you then have to make that determination before you decide exactly how you're going to remove that barrier.
Wow.
The second thing that we're doing is we're continuing to develop technology solutions so that our clients can get more done with less work, helping them manage everything. And as part of speaking about our ADA work, once we do these reports, they're not just paper reports. It's a database that we give our client access to so that then they can actually manage over this great period of time that they have to actually remove these barriers, what barriers they've removed. And then that helps them, if they end up with a complaint or lawsuit, it gives them the tools that they need to aggressively defend that lawsuit. So it takes less time, effort, and money for them to defend those lawsuits. You know, of course, we live in the United States of America where anybody can sue for anything, for any time. So we all have to be prepared to defend those lawsuits, unfortunately. But that gives them that data quickly at their hands so that they can reply back. And that oftentimes shuts down complaints and lawsuits because the plaintiffs then understand that these clients know exactly what they're doing. Also, as part of this process, what's hot on our plate is data collection for franchisee and store control. So a lot of franchisors are coming to us right now asking us to help them develop tools as part of their prototype process, that when a franchisee takes that prototype or when they build a store, a corporate store using that prototype, they can know exactly what's in that store so that in the future, if they decide to do some slight modification or update, they know what stores that segment or that item is in, so that then they can go out and they can make a change to that element in that store or remodel that store. As opposed to then having to go out and figure out what it's in, what stores it's not in. So again, it's about control and data and understanding. The better understanding businesses have about what they actually have, the better decisions that they can make. If they make better decisions in the long term, it should end up costing them less money because you have a lot less wasted motion.
Okay, very interesting. So the first one, so out of everything that's on your plate, the proactive lawsuit compliance, the barrier reports that you're doing, that I would think is just so interesting. But do you find that, without mentioning any clients' names, but do you find that sometimes when you do that for a client, that a client is hesitant to move forward or correct it, or that they have no choice but to because there's a pending or concerning lawsuit? In this day, I'm
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. In this day and age, where everyone is, especially retailers, are looking at reducing costs, reducing expense, and I believe what you are providing and with the ADA and enforcing that, it is a civil rights law. Believe me, that's so important. But in this day and age, the truth of the matter is, there's so many retailers out there that are hesitant to spend monies to correct the situation. Are you finding that more the case? I mean, have you supplied these barrier reports to certain companies and they've decided not to take action or wait on taking action?
Generally, no. If a company is going to invest the money to do the reports or do the surveys and the reports that we do, they are intent in removing those barriers because they've already come to the understanding and conclusion to actually spend that money that they need to remove the barriers. But an average ADA lawsuit, just to settle, to make it go away today, is around $14,000 to $15,000. That doesn't include any corrections. And typically, in every ADA lawsuit that we've ever seen, there is some substance to it, which means you can't just completely ignore it or just completely void the lawsuit. Now, what we've been able to do by having this information in our hands, or actually giving this information to our clients so that they have it in their hands, if they get that complaint, they can immediately send that information to their attorney, who then can fire back at the plaintiff's attorney or the plaintiff, and they go, oh, I understand they're doing what they're supposed to do. I'm going to go find the people who aren't doing that because that's what I'm after. So that's how you get a reduction in that. The clients who don't want to spend the money at all to do the surveys, which we don't see a lot of those because they're not coming to our door. They're certainly out there. We talk to them all the time, but they're not coming to us. They're the ones that primarily don't want to know, so they don't have to fix it. But unfortunately, that is the worst offense that they can ever have, because ignorance of the law is no excuse. And if they know what they've got, then they can develop a plan. And they don't have to do all of this tomorrow, but they can develop a plan. And if they're going to spend money in that store, say in 2 years, their plan can be to fix all this stuff in that store in 2 years. It doesn't have to be because I know about it today. I have to do it all today. It's all about planning and spending the money wisely, spending it on their schedule. If they get hit with a lawsuit, then they're going to be required to spend all that money at the plaintiff's pleasure, not at their pleasure.
And you bring up a very good point. If the average ADA lawsuit is $14,000 to $15,000, and to what you had mentioned earlier about how you're working with many of your clients for a 3, 5, or 7 year plan to correct these issues, I mean, it's pretty much a no-brainer to address it before it becomes a bigger issue.
I think so, and there are a lot of attorneys out there who think so as well. Proactive is always better than, I think, reactive, because you have more control over what you're doing and you're spending your money in a wiser fashion. One of our clients got hit with a lawsuit, and the Department of Justice joined in on it. They were required to bring all 540 of their facilities into 100% compliance over a 3-year period. They had no choice. So, and this was a client that actually thought that they were in compliance. They thought they were doing the right thing. So, versus others who really don't know, who actually have a lot more risk because they could even be a lot worse off than this client was, and they might not be able to do it in that 3-year time period.
Interesting. And also to share with our listeners more, what's interesting too is obviously when you're ADA compliant in your space, not only for everyone in your space, not only for your clients, your customers, the diners, the shoppers, but of course your own employees.
Yes, and that's actually even a little different than the public spaces, because that falls under Title I. There are actually several titles under the ADA. We primarily deal with Title III. What we're talking about here is public accommodation. Retail is public accommodation. And so when they're dealing with that public accommodation is dealing with the general public, their customers, that falls under Title III. Title I is where their employees fall under. And under Title I, then, which is a very broad segment of employment law, very, very complex. But basically what they have to do under Title I is they have to make reasonable accommodations as the specific employee may request that accommodation for their particular disability that they may have. And so that can become even more complex. And because you have no way of knowing every possible situation that you're going to run into, that's the way that the ADA was written, was to address that on an individual basis as opposed to a broad brush basis that may not actually work for their employees.
So now, Brethren, are you finding that with the new stores that are being built now, not the remodels, not the retrofits that we're going back to do this corrective action, but the new stores, restaurants, et cetera, that are being built now, are they then, in fact, is everyone more aware and compliant with ADA Title I and III for both employees and the public? Is that automatic that everyone is doing that?
That is really tough to answer. While they should, and
yes.
I don't think I would be honest in saying that every single one of them is doing so. There is still a lot of education that needs to be done for clients, for architects and engineers to understand exactly what this means. The ADA is very gray in a lot of areas,
Mhm.
and because it's gray, also because it's very complex, it's misapplied a lot.
Mhm.
A day doesn't go by that we don't still learn something, and we work with some of the other top accessibility consultants in the country, and it's same for them as well. We talk all the time, and we're always looking at something a little differently sometimes, and the light bulb and the aha moment comes and goes, oh, that's what that means. And so because we work together, and we work together with the Department of Justice and the Access Board, then we get to see those things hopefully before a lot of our clients and other architects do.
Mhm.
Why you need to have somebody who specializes in this, I think, to get a full and complete understanding of what's going on and what needs to happen in our buildings.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it's it's just a huge opportunity to get this further along, especially for new spaces. Now, so you shared with us a bit about your background earlier, or rather, what your company services are. So now you're a licensed architect.
I am a licensed architect.
Okay.
Yes, licensed in 14 states.
Okay. And then when did you start focusing more on ADA? Because Brad, I got to say, out of all the people I know, and I know a lot of people from, having interviewed a lot of folks, but also having been in the business, in the building and maintaining business, back in the retail days. You are one of the most incredible ADA experts I know. So at what point did you switch and focus more on ADA?
Well, first, thank you for that. I would suggest maybe you just don't hang out with enough weird people. That may be the reason why you don't do that. And I think this will explain a little bit. I've always been a code guy. My bachelor's is in engineering, so I always enjoyed the technology aspects of what I do more so than the artsy design stuff. So that's where I started out before I got my Master's of Architecture and went on to get my architectural license. I was accused in school of sleeping with the code book under my pillow, and I'm still accused of sleeping with the code book under my pillow today. I guess
like a true expert.
I would say, yeah. I like boxes. I like rules. If I have rules, I know what the game is, and then I can play the game. It's all about trying to find the uniqueness and how those rules apply to come up with a solution. Hand me a blank piece of paper, and I'm lost because I can do anything, and I have no challenges to what I want to do. And so I find the rules as the challenge of how do we achieve this using those rules. But so it started early on, but of course the ADA was signed into law on January 26, 1990, and became enforceable on January 26, 1992. That's the very first time. And I went to my first ADA seminar on March 19, 1992. It was a Thursday afternoon. And interesting, I was talking to some guys at the AIA the other day, and they were talking about this seminar series that they put on, and they asked me if I'd ever seen it or did I know about it. And I said, yes, I did, because I was there for the first one. And the reason I remember it so distinctly is because that was the Thursday after I got married on Pi Day, or March 14th. So here my wife and I come home from our honeymoon a little early so I could go to this seminar. So, so again, was I dropped on my head as a child? Do I have head damage because I love this subject so much? A lot of people think so, but I am a geek. I am an ADA geek. I love this, and that's what everybody in the office refers to me to as the ADA geek. Even though some of them are trying to tell me I'm a dork now, but I prefer to say I'm an ADA geek because I love this. It's challenging every single day, yet it brings a lot of value to society and to the owners of the buildings as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you bring up a very valid point. To paraphrase you a little bit, what you said earlier, Brad, you said, if I know the rules, I can play the game. And you know what? I don't know if everybody knows the rules. You bring up some very valid points. And I think what happens is that, again, putting back my old retailer hat on from back in the day, I remember when I was doing aggressive rollouts or remodeling, you rely with your architect partner. And they may not know all the rules. So you bring up a very valid point, about knowing the rules so we can all play the game. And I like how you're sharing the rules. That's what you're doing in our industry. I like that.
That is exactly it. Yeah, it's hard, and I would say it's impossible to know all of the rules. We as architects have so much to do across the board that you can't possibly know all the rules. So you have to kind of specialize in certain aspects in certain areas, and that's what I have done. And so when we have some process or some project or rollout or prototype going through our office, I get involved to make sure that we're complying with the ADA standards. Then we have other experts in our office who look strictly at the building code issues. So again, that's how we have developed our office into segments of experts in our office to bring the whole to our clients, as opposed to trying to know a little bit about everything and knowing nothing. We try to know a lot about a little bit and then bring the different people together so that we can, again, provide the full service to our clients.
So your clients can know the rules. I like that. Okay. Now, what do you feel is the biggest challenge our industry is facing right now?
Two things off the top of my head would be, again, ADA compliance, because that's what we've been talking about, and consistency in product. We hear over and over and over from our clients that they're having a hard time getting consistency in the field from where they are at corporate headquarters. And that's where we've brought technology to bear to help them understand ADA compliance, what they need to do to bring their facilities into ADA compliance. And then on the other hand, the technology brings consistency to that because they know where they are, they know if they're doing good or they know if they're doing bad. And either one of those is not a bad thing. To know that you're doing good, that's good. To know that you're doing bad, that's good too. It's if you have no idea how you're doing, that's what's bad. And so we use technology to bring that to the clients, to give them the data so that they can have a better understanding where they are and then can use that to put together a course to get them where they want to be. So that's what we're doing is we're providing them the data to develop that roadmap to get to where they want to be. And then if they want us, we can also help them develop that roadmap to get them to where they want to be as well.
Okay. My next question, how do you think ADA compliancy will look in the next 5 years and then the next 10 years? And do you believe ADA requirements will evolve and change in the future?
Well, that's the easiest question. The answer is yes, they are evolving and changing. The first set of rules, the 1991 standards, went into effect back in 1992. In 2004, the United States Access Board published the new standards that then were adopted as they adopted guidelines that were then adopted by the Department of Justice as the new standards in September of 2010. So yes, they're going to change. New data is coming about. New understandings are coming about. There are more and more information is being provided. So yes, that is ongoing. But the thing that we see is the building codes are changing approximately every years. I have the privilege. I call it a privilege. There are some people who think I'm a little odd, as we discussed earlier, and that it's not a privilege, but I think it's a privilege to represent the National Association of Convenience Stores on the ANSI A117.1 committee, which is what becomes adopted as the building code in a lot of places. Because it is private, it can adapt and change quicker than the ADA can as a government regulation or as a federal government regulation. And there are changes coming to that, and pretty significant and drastic changes. For instance, the 2018 standard is geared right now to probably have a 67-inch diameter turning circle for wheelchair turning spaces as opposed to the current 60-inch. So that's approximate 25% increase in area if this is adopted, which at this point in time I'm pretty sure it's going to be. So those are the kind of changes that we're seeing. Will it take a while for that to get to the ADA? Absolutely it will, because the ADA, again, is a federal regulation, and it's just a slower moving thing to change those regulations. But the building codes can and do change, and the ADA will eventually catch up to that when it comes to that. And so that's what we're going to see. That's just an example of one of the things that is changing, and we will continue to see those kind of changes happen.
Wow. Yeah, it just sounds like, especially, with the ADA, which is federal law, it's just anything that huge is so slow moving to make change in. So that was that 67-inch diameter of full turn you mentioned. That was for the 2018 standard coming out.
That's when we expect it to be that we start to see it in building codes. Yes, the 20 building codes, when they start to be adopted, it will appear in that, and then very shortly after that is when it will become enforceable. So we're still a few years away from that. But again, we talked about the difference between the ADA and the building code, and to me it's kind of like Kleenex versus tissue. We use the ADA as a large overviewing subject, kind of like we use Kleenex to actually mean tissue when we have a brand called Kleenex. So, it's the same thing. The ADA is used as an accessibility standard, but there are many other accessibility standards like the building codes that do change more rapidly than the ADA standards actually do.
That's a very good analogy, Brad, that you brought up. And hopefully eventually one day everything will merge just to one, where it just would be more comprehensive. Yes.
And we're much, much closer to that than we ever have been throughout history. We've finally gotten mostly a single building code in the country that's uniform throughout the country, and I think we're going to start seeing that more and more. One of the committees that I served on was the harmonization committee, which was to help harmonize the ANSI standard with the ADA standard, so that they are more one. I think there will always be some differences just because the building codes bring research to the forefront. And just like changing the circle to 67 inches, there was research done on what was actually necessary to generate that turning radius, which the ADA didn't have at the time that it was adopted in 2000 or published in 2004. So, those are the kind of things that we're continuing to see. More research generates new requirements, and then new requirements get into the building codes going forward, and then eventually it will be brought into the ADA when the federal government gets around to adopting a revised ADA standard. It took almost 20 years to revise the first ADA standard, so is it going to be another 20 years before that standard is revised? Probably so. But we still have the building codes in between that we still have to comply with, not just ADA standards as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess from a property owner point of view, it's just so harrowing. It really is. We're always playing catch up.
Yes.
And I don't know if we're ever going to get caught up when you think about it. It's just like until it becomes one compliant, all, building code and ADA. Yeah, very, very interesting. Okay. Well, we're going to get ready to wrap up soon, but before we wrap up, I need to ask you one of my favorite questions. We've been so intensely speaking on ADA. This is a lighter question, and one of my favorite ones. What book title, song, or movie best describes this industry to you?
Well, what I wanted to say is Animal House, but that's not true. I think the one that I've been able to come up with that probably really fits is a song titled "Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger." It's about what we try to do is transform our clients' businesses. So, if we can work harder to provide something that's better and faster, it ends up being stronger in the long run, and clients, that's what they want. They want a stronger, more profitable business. And so if we can bring that to them, that, it's not we don't look at it as our job as architects, just to provide them a set of plans that they can go out and build their facility with. We believe that it's in our best interest to help them with their best interest, which is to generate a prosperous and successful business. Whatever that may be, it's different for different clients. But so I think that song says it all right there.
Love that. And last question, and I think I know the answer to this. What inspires you?
I had to give this one a lot of thought. But, ultimately it comes down to helping clients avoid unnecessary and frivolous lawsuits. I understand the need for compliance. I understand the value to the citizens of our country and the world, and how it benefits them. But there's a lot of bad that goes along with that, people who try to make money on the wrong side of this.
Sure.
So if we can help our clients avoid those unnecessary and frivolous lawsuits and help them do the right thing, and I think they want to do the right thing, in the long run, they understand that. It's just that they've been made so fearful that stepping across that line could hurt them worse. And so we help educate them so that's not true, so that they understand it, because that's just not true. And so, I get a lot of satisfaction out of helping them understand the right way to do this, not the knee-jerk way to do this. Because if in the long run, the disability community itself has a lot of income, discretionary income to spend, and by businesses being accessible, those people will come to their businesses and spend their money in their businesses, and that is a tremendous value to that company. And sometimes it's not just the person with the disability that they're after. There was a Guinness commercial on TV maybe a year or two ago. I'm not sure how long, but it shows a wheelchair basketball game going on, and these are just friends playing wheelchair basketball. And they finish, and all but one of them gets out of their wheelchair. Well, these are friends who came together to play wheelchair basketball with their friend who had to use the wheelchair. So when they all left, they all went out for a beer. Well, who got to choose which restaurant they went to? And in a sense, it was the guy who uses a wheelchair, because if the bar wasn't accessible, none of them were going to go to that bar. It wasn't just his money that they were losing; it was the entire group of friends. It could be the entire group of family that couldn't get into that business. And people in the disability community communicate with each other. It's a strong community. And so they talk about what businesses treat them well and what businesses treat them well. They talk about what businesses are accessible and what businesses aren't accessible. So in a sense, it's some of the best advertising that you can do if you make your facility accessible, because the word will get out, and all of that money could come to your business and be a big boon to your bottom line as well. So knowing all of that and being able to share that with businesses the positive aspects of this, not just the negative aspects of this, but the positive aspects of it, is what I find exciting.
Yeah, well, I tell you, and what a great way to wrap up our show today. But I tell you, Brad, I just really admire your passion and your true love for what you do. You're an advocate for the disability folks. You're an advocate for the organizations trying to fix their situations, and that really needs to have a light shown on it more. So thank you so much for chatting with us today and sharing all your expertise and knowledge on this area. I mean, every time I talk to you, we've had a couple of conversations before this, and every time I talk to you, I feel like I've learned something new. So just thank you so much for being an advocate for this very important aspect in our industry.
Well, thank you very much for having me and allow me to express my passion and get excited about this. And I'm glad to hear that you did learn something new, because that's my hope, is that every time I talk to somebody, that there's some little something or maybe some big something that they learn from this.
I love that. And absolutely. And if they want to learn more, where can they reach you or your website information?
Two things. They can go to our website, which is, of course, then it's MacintoshTransforms.com. And Macintosh is MCINTOSH. Transforms, TRANSFORMS. So it is Transforms with an S on the end of it. Again, so that's www.MacintoshTransforms.com. And then they can send an email to me if they want to adageek@MacintoshTransforms.com. That's ADA.
That's awesome. Brad, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to chatting again with you at a future show and sharing perhaps a case study or other developments in the ADA world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and we would love to. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for joining Shop Talk 360, real conversations in the commercial design, construction, and facilities industry. You can reach out to us at grace@gracedaily.com.